So you're a philosopher?
Yes. I'm Grace Helton from Princeton University. It's almost certainly the case that some of my views about what the world is like are wrong. But could my most fundamental assumptions about the world be incorrect? Right now, I think I'm in a pretty quiet room. The sun is shining outside. The sky is blue. My dog is sprawled by my side, asleep. Could I be hallucinating this entire state of affairs? Perhaps in the throes of a psychotic episode? Could this be a vivid dream? In the last couple of decades, philosophers have become increasingly interested in whether, in particular, we might be living right now in a wide-scale computer simulation, perhaps one constructed by highly sophisticated artificial intelligence. They call this the simulation hypothesis. It's in the context of this more recent interest in the simulation hypothesis that David Chalmers writes a book in 2022 called Reality Plus: Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy. Chalmers asks, if we're living in a simulation right now, would our views about what the world is like be correct in at least some basic respects? And would our living in a simulation in any way diminish the value of our lives? Overall, Chalmers' answers to these questions are soothing. He thinks that in the simulation, our views about reality would be correct in at least some respects, and our lives might still be deeply meaningful. Chalmers has a particular view, he calls it structuralism, about what makes things a coffee cup or chairs or tables or curtains, the kinds of things they are. For Chalmers, to be, for instance, a coffee cup, there isn't any other deeper thing or essence that makes a coffee cup beyond what kinds of things it tends to do. So if we're living in a simulation, and if there's something in that world that holds coffee, that I can bring it to my lips, that can be used to pour coffee and so on, there are coffee cups in the simulation. So we can be assured that there are some entities in our environment and that we have knowledge of those entities. But this approach doesn't succeed when it comes to vindicating knowledge about the psychologies of others. This is because mental states aren't just what they do. Think, for instance, of a joyful mood. If you're in a joyful mood, you might want to jump around or dance. You might want to sing. You might be inclined to watch happy movies or to listen to happy-sounding music. It's usually thought that something could exhibit all of those behavioral tendencies, but not actually be in a joyful mood. Psychological states are fakeable. This is in contrast to being a coffee cup. Anything that plays the coffee cup role just is a coffee cup. There's a way you can't fake being a coffee cup. So let's suppose that Chalmers is right, that when it comes to non-psychological things, like coffee cups, they are just what they do. Why does Chalmers think, as he does think, that this fact alone can contribute at least a bit to the thought that in the simulation our lives would be meaningful? What he's thinking is, part of a meaningful life is being in touch with reality. And if we have at least some knowledge of our environment in the simulation, we are not tragically cut off from reality. Rather, we are in touch with at least some aspects of reality. Still, we can ask, what would it mean if we nevertheless are cut off from knowledge of others' psychological states? This actually precludes that we could have deeply or optimally meaningful lives in the simulation. This is because we would be cut off what is, for at least many of us, the most important part of reality. Let me try to convince you of this with a couple of contrasting thought experiments. First thought experiment. Suppose God herself were to come down and tell us that all of our beliefs about the psychologies of others, for instance, that your partner is bored by the movie or your parents love you, those all amount to knowledge. But for whatever reason, few or none of our beliefs about things like coffee cups, tables, chairs, atoms, and shrubs amount to knowledge. For many of us, I'm sure we'd be shocked, but I also suspect that the overall emotional response would be something like curiosity. Indeed, I think some of us might be delighted at this disclosure, as it would introduce an element of wonder or mystery into our everyday lives. Here's a second thought experiment. Suppose God herself were to come down and tell us that while all of our beliefs about things like coffee cups amount to knowledge, few or none of our beliefs about the psychologies of others amount to knowledge. So I can know in this situation that the coffee cup in front of me is real, but my other beliefs, my partner is bored by the movie, my parents love me, and so on, those don't amount to knowledge. For whatever reason, I'm cut off from that bit of reality. I think for many of us, contemplating such a scenario inspires horror, cutting to the very center of what we most care about. These contrastive thought experiments tell us that for many of us, the value of knowledge of other psychologies, what we might call social knowledge, is far more important for the meaningfulness of our lives. So bringing this back to the simulation hypothesis, if Chalmers is right that we can be assured that there are things like coffee cups in the simulation, just by knowing that there are things that hold coffee, pour coffee, and the like, this really isn't that soothing. This approach doesn't work when it comes to other psychologies. So we can't be reassured, at least by using this strategy, that if we're living in a simulation, we're in touch with the part of reality that most matters for a meaningful life. But also, maybe we aren't living in a simulation. I think I'd be pretty happy with that.